welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA. What are you laughing at? Another episode of Rabbi Chaim Coffman's Controversial Issues, live from the Holy Land. Welcome back. Don't smoke crack, Rabbi. How are you?
Always a pleasure to be here. I wasn't even looking at the screen.
Oh.
You stifled me. You shut me down. I couldn't even speak. I was speaking to nobody.
I got to turn you up some. I think I silenced you too much. There we go. We don't want to silence you. We want to hear what you got to say today. So very good.
I don't know. A lot of people want to silence me. That's not a bad thing.
Right. That's crazy. Good deal, man. Well, I'll tell you what. I was trying to start off with that timer because I had to rebuild the whole Wirecast document. I was playing around with the timer and I forgot to click the start button. So it was a very still 1 minute. I'll put it that way. It wasn't even quite a minute. So
I don't know. I was counting. I kept counting. I was like 1, 2.
Right. That's funny. See, I just found.
I was like, "Where's the ding? Where's the ding?"
The ting is here.
The ting. Right.
Very good. All right, so this is gonna be a fun show today. I didn't put the subtitle because we're probably gonna cover more than just that. So subtitle being family purity, I guess, is going to be kind of a subtitle, I reckon, right? Nah.
That sounds good. We're probably gonna hit a few different things with that, but
that's kind of why I just left
Cooties
it off.
is a good title.
Yeah, it was.
It's like a lot of things I'll say. Well, when you try and explain,
yep.
You try and explain things that have to do with, let's say, purity and impurity. So, for lack of a better term, we call it spiritual cooties.
Right on.
That's my trademark. I'm going to patent it, and anyone's going to use it, I'm going to sue you because I think it's a good thing. That's the way some people look at it.
Yep, there you go.
Anyway.
There you go. All right, cool. Well, the floor is yours, sir. Take it away.
Okay. Again, always a pleasure to be here. I think we're gonna work backwards. We'll start from the beginning, and then we'll get to our spiritual cooties. And we spoke last week about differences between men and women. Physical differences, spiritual differences. Right, we spoke about marriage a little bit. I didn't really flush it out. Spoke about divorce. One thing we have to realize is in the ultra Orthodox world, or even in the Orthodox world, obviously, and it's not as obvious because most people aren't aware, but dating and marriage is a totally different thing, than in the secular world. There are people. Marriage seems to be, an institution that's on the decline because we see that more than 50% end up getting divorced. So marriage doesn't make a whole lot of sense. People get married more than once, right? Statistics are probably higher. And in the ultra-Orthodox community, the statistics probably about 5%, maybe 8%. It is on the rise. That is definitely true. And I had, a secular Jew once told me, he said, see, it's on the rise. Even if it's on the rise, it still has a 90% chance of being successful, right? When you look in the secular world, it's a disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. So what is dating like, in the Orthodox world? Why is it so successful? Now, someone might say, well, look, there's no divorce. Well, we're not Christians, right? There is divorce. Divorce is definitely written in the Torah. If a person can't work out their differences, etc., then there is a mitzvah to get divorced, right? It's definitely on the books, no question, no question about that. The idea is, though, marriage is something serious. It's something that we try as best as possible to try and keep the marriage together. Obviously, if they've gotten help and it doesn't help and it doesn't work, then the person will have to get divorced, right? But, some marriages can be saved, maybe some others can't. Even so, why are the statistics so low in divorce in the ultra-Orthodox community? So let's understand, when someone gets married or wants to get married, right, by a woman, she'll start dating, let's say by the age of 20, right, 20, 21, more or less, for a guy a little bit later, 21, 22, 23, something like that. They mature, a little bit later, as we understand. So in the way of dating, right, they're going to be set up. And obviously, people who are setting them up know their strengths, right? Know what they're looking for. So therefore, people have different lists, and they try and see, who would be a match for this one, who would be a match for that one, etc. And obviously, they should have a lot in common, right? Definitely, religious background should have in common, right? That's why, that's already the base, for something that is going to last, because there's a major difference, and we'll speak about this also. There's a major difference between love and infatuation. Because love by us only comes after marriage. You got to say, how can a person get married, if they're not in love, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean when a person's dating, they're going to see skyrockets, right? But obviously, the Talmud says that when a person meets, someone of the opposite sex, they have to be attracted, right? That is an important thing over here. If there is no attraction, then there's no point to continue dating. So if, let's say, they both sides check each other out, check out the references, check out the families, different things, okay, if they decide to move forward. So in the Orthodox camp, they don't touch, right? They meet, they don't touch. So touching always gets in the way, right? Physicality gets in the way, right? I'll reference When Harry Met Sally, right? I'll reference that a lot, because that, if you see the movie, you'll understand that always gets in the way. So obviously, and also statistically, definitely been proven that, if kids are separated, boys and girls separated, they do better scholastically, right? So that's not something like, nice statistic. Well, it is a good statistic because it shows it's distraction, right? So when a person's dating, what's the purpose of their dating? They're dating for marriage. They're not dating for any other reason. So therefore, they're already going in knowing, okay, we know about the family, I know about the person. Now we have to see, if they're compatible, if they get along, if they have what to talk about. Now, usually after a first date, you're not gonna, you speak, let's say, for an hour, maybe a little bit more. It's not going to be that, it's not going to be that intense. So after that, you'll see, okay, usually you're not going to reject it straight out. Normally you'll go on a second date. If after the second date you see, either you're not attracted or, you don't see it's going, in the right direction. Okay, so, one side will end it, or both sides will end it, and the person will go on a number of dates. And after a number of dates, they'll have to make a decision, right? They'll have to make a decision, can I see myself being married to this person, right? So you're going to say, how could that be? People date for a long time, months, right? 6 months, a year, more. People live together, right? And statistically, it's proven that if a person lives together before they get married, the statistics go up exponentially of divorce. Now, if they live together, they don't get divorced normally, right? They're not going to necessarily split up. Doesn't mean it can't happen. But once they get married, statistics are higher. I think it's over 70% or 75%. You're going to say, if they live together for so long, why are they going to get divorced after they get married? Well, it's not the same. It's not the same if you have a binding contract now. Now it's totally different. Because if a guy wanted to, he just walks away, or the woman just walks away, or whatever the case is. So you got to say, okay, how can a person know? How can a person know after so many dates, let's say, 8, 9 dates, something like that? How can they say now, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to know what to do, right? If a person feels comfortable enough, with the other person, after a few dates, they'll do some other things. They'll see them in other contexts. Let's say they'll do fun things. They'll go, to go to a museum. They'll go, they'll go out to eat or something, or whatever, whatever it is. They'll see, they'll do things. They'll do things in a, in a fun way to see how the other person reacts and different things, etc. There's a story. It's crazy. I think I mentioned this last week, but I think it bears repeating. Right? There's a story that two people were dating, and a woman wanted to see what this guy she was dating. She wanted to see how he reacted under pressure. So what did she do? Now, I would never recommend doing this, and you'll see why. So they're driving somewhere, stopped at a red light, and what does she do? She puts the car in park, and she takes out the keys. Meanwhile, the light turns green. People are honking, yelling and screaming. And this guy says, can you please give me the keys? And she's waiting. and she's waiting. People are screaming, people are yelling, and she's waiting. And he's like, can you please give me the keys? So finally, the light changes. People are still screaming, whatever. So then she finally gives him back the keys. So after she gives him back the keys and they go on their way, so he asked her, I don't understand. He said, why in the world did you just do that? She said, well, I just want you to know it was a test, right? I was just testing you, and I want you to know you passed. So the guy looked at her and said, I just want you to know you failed, and he took her home, right? So that is not something, a person definitely should do, when they're dating. So you're going to say, well, how do I know how this person reacts, right? How do I know how they react under pressure? You may not see that until they're under pressure, right? When a person in general, let's say when a person's engaged, probably the most stressful time. I remember, when I was engaged, so we got married here in Israel, so we had to make all the plans. We had a party planner at this, at a hotel. So every time we went, it wasn't just like, okay, you want this, you want that. Every question had like 10 subset questions. It's like, okay, if you want the flowers, do you want pink, you want gray, you want this, I had like 20, it's like we had a headache afterwards because, it's just stressful. Do you want it like this, you want it like that, you're 20 something young adult, like, you never done this before. Usually the parents are the ones planning it. You get a little bit of say. So all of a sudden you're the one doing it. Yeah, it's stressful. There are a lot, there can be a lot of stressful things, right? So during the engagement, a person can sort of gauge, something, but there's certain things you're not going to be able to gauge, right? You're not going to be able to know, no matter how many friends you speak to, no matter how many people know the family, see them in different contexts. There are still certain things that you won't uncover, right? You may not uncover, and it'll take time to uncover. Now, I'm not saying bad things, right? If something is hidden, let's make clear. If one side hides something, let's say, I know of a case where one side hid the fact that their daughter had depression, right? And they hid this from the other side. But the depression, even if they wanted to say it was mild after the fact, that wasn't the case, right? It was a severe case, but this woman was able to put herself together, this, that, and in the end, I think they ended up getting divorced. But someone will say, well, we couldn't give over that information because that's Lashon Hara, right? The Chofetz Chaim says clear, something like that you have to give over. If there's a medical condition, the person, let's say, had cancer when they were younger, or something like that. If there's a medical condition, or they're going through something now, it doesn't matter. If there's a medical condition, you have to tell the other side. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to tell them straight out, right? If you tell them straight out that, first of all, you just want to see if they're compatible. If they're not compatible, they see they're not compatible, why mention it? It makes no sense to mention it at the beginning. Maybe after a second date, a third date, right? Let's say after a second date, if they still want to, continue, then they'll probably have to mention it, right? But you can't say, well, it's Lashon Hara, how can I mention it? Can't speak badly about the person, in their condition. That's, if someone has a mental condition, or some ailment, some physical condition, whatever it is, you have to tell them at some point, right? You don't have to tell them at the beginning, but you have to tell them. It's irresponsible. 100%. Once they're married, then all of a sudden the person finds out, and he was given a bag of bones. No, no pun intended, right? He's given a bag of bones over. What he's supposed to do? You planned all this time, and then you find out. There's serious issues, and and there are serious issues that may not be able to be fixed. Or how are you going to deal with it now? Certain things could happen over time, and it wasn't really there before, and other things happen. Okay, that's that a husband and wife have to work out, right? But we're talking about with coming in with different, with different baggage. That's pretty serious, right? That's something that you can't have. That, in other words, you have to lay everything on the table. At some point, I remember I met my wife in a very unorthodox way, and but we were up north with different people, and we happened to meet up north in Sfas. And we took a bus back to Jerusalem. It's about a 3-hour bus ride, give or take. And so anyway, we were talking, on the bus, and after 3 hours, I knew, right? I knew this was the one. Now, my wife wasn't so convinced. She needed to be convinced a little bit, but we had similar background. We grew up, similar ways. We had similar likes, dislikes. Like I had no issues, right? There were a religious issue, she wasn't really holding where I was holding at the time, right? But there was a chance I took on, certainly on my part, but thank God it worked out. But when you have a connection like that, I'm saying even without physicality, but you relate on a much deeper level, right? We're going to get to spiritual cooties in a second. So if you relate on a deeper level, right? And you feel that, when you meet, there are no lulls in conversation. You're not looking for things to say. Now, when a person dates, let's say, first date, first few dates, you go to a hotel lobby, you go to a park, you go, somewhere like that where, I don't know, park, probably like a hotel lobby somewhere. And whatever, you're just talking, getting to know each other. It's artificial, right? It's something that's artificial. You can't really know from the first, from the first date. You have to see, you have to see how it goes. But if you see after, let's say, a second date, conversation's interesting, you relate to each other, this and that, and then it continues. The more it continues, you're not going to say, oh, I can't stand this person now. Right. The more it continues, the deeper it should get, but it can only go deeper once, it can only go deeper after marriage. Right. Love only comes after marriage. A lot of things that in the dating process, a lot of things, is artificial. I mean, after, let's say, fourth or fifth date, what's going to happen is you'll meet the other side. Right. The parents of the boy, parents of the girl, they'll meet each other. A few times we met, we met the other side in, let's say in a hotel lobby, et cetera. We spoke to them, and then, and then they spoke to our kids, we switched off, et cetera. So, it can be done that way. It can be done in your house, a few times done, it's done in the house also. So, you get, at least, you get to meet the person, you speak to them a little bit, and that's, so then after, let's say a number of dates, let's say 7, 8, 8 dates, that should be the end, right? If everything's good at that point, they should be able to make a decision, right? Now, if there's something stopping them in the decision, so, they have to go to someone to get advice, someone who can guide them, because it could just be jitters, right? By a lot of people, it's just jitters. By other people, it might be something there that, might be something much deeper, not just normal jitters. Jitters are normal, right? We're not going to say not. It's a tremendous, it's a tremendous thing, to get engaged, to get married. I remember, when I was engaged, I read the introduction to Made in Heaven by Vari Kaplan, blessed memory. It's whatever. It's a book about marriage. So when I didn't get past the introduction. Why did I get past the introduction? Because he says over there, the person you're going to meet, the person you're going to get married to, doesn't just affect you, doesn't affect them. It affects, affects both of you, affects your kids, affects your grandkids, all the way down, future generations. I'm like, who, me? I'm like, forget that. Bam, shut the book. I didn't get past the introduction. If there's something, if it's just jitters, you can get over it. If it's something, deeper, right? Something that, like there are red flags. Somebody sees something that, just doesn't add up or is bad, right? So that's enough to break it off. If it's, if it's something real, right? Sometimes the person may be head over heels, and they may not see things, necessarily so clear. They might not see the red flags. Other people who can guide them may see them if they speak to them about it. And there were people who got into bad marriages because they refused to see the signs. Right, that certainly is not good. So you're going to say, well, how's the person supposed to know? Okay, it's a good question, right? But obviously that's what parents are there, other people are there, to guide, to see, it could be something egregious that, bad manners. You see, anger. Anger comes out in different ways. That could definitely be a red flag. You don't know how it's going to flare up, what's going to happen. Different things, even though you'll be in your best behavior, right? You certainly don't want bad things to come out. They'll come out later, right? Whatever bad character traits, that we have. But, even if they come out later, it shouldn't make or break something. Yeah, unless it's something that's, unless it's something that's severe, right? It's something that's much more egregious, right? Now, so in the secular world, someone will say, come on. Someone will say 8 dates, 8 dates, you're going to get engaged. So what did I do? 2.5 weeks. I was ready to get engaged, and we got engaged, unofficially. Then right before Thanksgiving, flew back to the States, halftime of the football game, boom, opened up the champagne. People thought I was out of my mind. They thought I was absolutely out of my mind. They're like, what are you talking about? I said, Mazel tov, we're engaged. So, like I said, I didn't necessarily do it in the most, orthodox way, but, we didn't really have any doubts. And then whatever, we planned the wedding in Israel, and that was the whole story because they wanted us to get married in America, whatever, but in the end, after a certain amount of time, you're going to have to make a decision, right? In other words, do you see yourself with this person, or not? And even if a person's nervous, but they don't pinpoint anything, they get along great, they have great conversations, they have a lot in common, they like the family, they met the family, and, they know the family and different things or whatever, that's not something to say, I'm not going to go forward just because, just because a person, a person has, a person has the jitters. But again, you have to see if it's really jitters or there's something else there. If there's nothing else there, then obviously it should be, it should be sealed, it should be done, and, the person's going to get engaged. Now, since there is no physical contact, so therefore that's better, as we mentioned earlier, because that's always a distraction. And that's the difference. That's the difference between love and infatuation, because the person's going to have to realize once they're married, they're not going to be able to be with their spouse whenever they want, right? And that's what we're going to get to. We're going to get to spiritual cooties, but it's a much deeper thing. First of all, you both come from religious homes, or let's say you didn't, but you have similar backgrounds, similar interests. They don't have to be exactly the same. Person doesn't have to be, polar opposites, either. Imagine if my wife was as outspoken as I am, probably wouldn't get along so well, right? So I remember my oldest daughter, when she got engaged, so the head of the yeshiva, got up to speak at the engagement, and she went up to the yeshiva to see what the yeshiva was like, to understand the philosophical background of the yeshiva. So when the head of the yeshiva got up to speak, so the head of the yeshiva said, I've been involved in a lot of matches, in my life. Said, but I've never gotten the third degree by the bride. So anyway, as he was speaking, I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. She takes after her mother, right?" So one of the rabbis that works in the yeshiva said, "Wait a minute, I spoke to you on the phone." I said, "No, she takes right after you." I said, "She takes after me." I said, "Come on, right?" So, but in the end, okay, she wanted to understand, what the background was like, what the guys are like there, what the philosophical background was. So she went to speak to the head of the yeshiva, right? That's what she did. She went up there. It was a couple hours away from Jerusalem, right? She went up there and she wanted to know. Okay, she wanted clarification. That's not a problem. Definitely not a problem. She wanted to understand, what she's getting into. So, so based on that, okay, so now you have the engagement, and again, why should the bond be strong even before marriage? Because you have a ton of things in common, right? It doesn't mean you have everything in common. There are going to be differences, no question, right? But you have enough in common, family-wise, religious-wise, what you went through, what the other person went through, not everything, but it doesn't really matter because there's enough there. So you're going to say, but still, okay, let's say there were 8 dates. They get engaged. When are they going to get married? Probably 3 months later, right? Give or take during the year when it's going to be, right? 3 months later. I got married 6 months later. Nightmare. Absolute nightmare. That's why they do it very quick. They do it 2 months, 2.5 months. You can plan it in 2.5 months, 3 months. Definitely doable. Definitely doable. So now they get married, they get set up, etc. And so now we come to another aspect of marriage. So now we're going to keep this PG-13, right? And that is that we speak about, intimacy. Now, intimacy is an important thing, right? And even though it's an important thing, they're going to have to realize, they're going to have to learn, right? They're going to have to learn they can't be together, a certain time of the month. Because the Torah tells me, book of Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19, it says when a woman's going to have a discharge, she gets her period, right, from her flesh, she'll be blood, she'll be in a state of separation, 7-day period, right? Anyone who touches her shall remain contaminated until the evening. Now, that doesn't apply today because we don't have a temple, right? That's why I call it the spiritual cooties over here, because we're talking about impurity, right? So she still is impure for 7 days. It's really another 7-day period. It's really about 2 weeks. It's really about 2 weeks. Now, if a person was only interested, right, or mainly interested, in the way his wife looks, well, after a while, it's not going to look the same, right? She has a couple kids, it's not going to look the same. So, a person has to treat his spouse. The Talmud says he has to treat her even better than he treats himself. Now, that's a little bit difficult to understand because the reality is we don't treat anybody more. You have to love her more than you love yourself. Who loves anybody more than ourselves? Nobody. Nobody. That's, you have to give so much. The guy has to give so much of himself, right, in order to take care of his wife. So, therefore, okay, there's time to be intimate. There's a time to be separate. Now, women are like this. Men are going to have issues with this. Right, I'm a guy, right? So men will have issue with this because it's hard, right? Even if you can't be intimate, just passing things to each other, cuddling, hugging, whatever, why should that be forbidden? Because again, until she goes to the mikvah, until she immerses, right? There's going to be a separation. Now, even if the blood stops, doesn't matter, right? There's still another 7-day period. So you're talking 12 days, 13 days, 2 weeks. She could stay and it could be longer, whatever it is. But a person has to treat his wife, not like an object. If a person treats his wife like an object, that marriage will never last. It only lasts a certain amount of time. That you have to do other things other than the physical. Now, it's not an easy thing, right? No question. It's not an easy thing because people brought up in the secular world there, anything goes, anytime. Okay, you'll tell me it's unhealthy. A woman gets her period, to be intimate. I get it. It's okay. So they won't have intercourse. Fine. Right. But, you can do other things. Right. But so in the secular world, anything goes, anytime, any place. Right. In the religious world, why is this such a better thing? Right. Why is it such a better thing? It's such a better thing for one very important reason. Because once you can't be together, right? You can't share things more intimately like you normally would. You're not going to have those type of conversations during that time, etc. So you got to treat your wife like a person, right? You have to speak about other things, different things, etc. Do things together that don't have to do with intimacy, right? And if that's all the guy wants, she's not going to be interested, right? Maybe once in a while, but it's not, that marriage is going to be a disaster. But the whole point is, once she goes to the mikvah and comes back, right, after 2 weeks, it's a rekindling over here, right? It's like going through the marriage again, and if it happens again, another time, because the heart grows fonder, when you're not together. One of the things the rabbis wanted to make sure as well is the fact that we stay separate, for a certain amount of time. So a person's not with his wife whenever he wants. Right, and if a person is, it'll kill him. That's where a lot of his strength is. Do it enough times, a person will get weaker. Right, there's no question. So it wasn't only a health issue, right? It's probably more of an issue. That's one issue, right? But it's probably more of an issue, of being separate and treating each other like they should be treated when you can't have contact. Now that's going to rejuvenate the marriage. 100%. That's going to keep things fresh, etc. So you say, okay, but what if she gets pregnant? Okay, so if she gets pregnant, she doesn't get her period. She doesn't have to go, right? She's not going to have to go to the mikveh. True, right? But even in that, during that time, you're still not allowed to be with her whenever you want, right? It still has to be, a limit, and anyone who's known a pregnant wife, they're not going to want to be with you, the entire time. It's just uncomfortable, right? Gaining weight and this and hormones and more hormones, right? So it's not, it's not exactly going to be the same, right? But a person also has to have eyes in the back of their head. They have to sense, when she's interested, not interested, etc. But the idea is separation's not a bad thing. Right? What are people going to argue on this? They're going to say, oh, the Torah over here says that, if she shows any blood, et cetera, you have to separate, right? There's an impurity, right? So what are the doctors going to tell you? Why is that impurity? Why in the world is that impurity? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense because that's a natural thing, right? If a woman doesn't get pregnant or she's not with anybody, right? So what's going to be? What's going to be? She'll get a period. That's natural. Right? Until she doesn't get it anymore, until she's older. So fine, that's a natural thing. So what are you telling me? What are you telling me? Purity and impurity doesn't make sense according to science. Who says it has to make sense according to science? Right? We don't care if it makes sense according to science or not. We believe that the Torah is true, right? And the Torah is telling you there's a form of what we call impurity, right? I think it's a bad translation, but it's the word for tumah. Right, to be tameh, right? It's a state of, it's a state of impurity. That's, I guess, how we'll define it, right? But for a woman, what does it represent, right? There are many things it represents. One thing is that once she gets her period, it represents the fact she won't be having kids, right? This cycle, she's not having kids. Could be the next cycle, she also won't have kids. The cycle after that, it doesn't matter. But there's a loss, right? That's the point. There's a loss over here, right? I'm not saying you mourn it, right? But there's a loss. There has to be a separation, right? And the Torah is telling you that because of this loss, right? Because of this inability to conceive now. So so now you have to separate, right? That's how we're gonna look at it. You want to tell me, it doesn't go according to science. I agree. It's a natural thing. But the Torah is not telling me that. The Torah is telling me if there would be a Beis Hamikdash, if there would be a temple, anything she sits on, right? Anything she sits on becomes impure, right? Can't sit on it, right? Just have her own bed, her own stool, her own chairs, right? But so I had somebody a number of years ago, tell me that, his wife's impure, he can't sit on anything. That's not true. Well, they weren't Jewish anyway at that point. I still don't think they're Jewish, but it doesn't matter. So he said, but we should go back to the Bible and do exactly what the Bible says. Well, you can't do that. Why not? Because that was only in the time of the temple, right? In the time of the temple, you had purity and impurity, right? You had the Kohanim, you had the priests. They couldn't come in contact with dead bodies. Still, they're not allowed to come in contact with dead bodies. In general, they can't go to a cemetery today. But that's about it, right? In the time of the temple, there are many things they had to be careful of in order to go into the temple, in order to ritually slaughter animals and do what they needed to do. They had to be in a higher level of purity, right? So the Torah tells me there are different levels. There are different levels, of impurity, right? What's the highest level of impurity? A dead body, right? That's the highest level, right? After that, you got animals, you got other things, etc. But this does not apply. Right, contaminated till the evening does not apply, unless we had a Beis Hamikdash, unless we had a temple. We don't have a temple today. So this guy was arguing with me, back and forth. I said, we don't have a temple. You listen to the rabbis, they say there's no temple. You don't do it. When the temple comes back, if there's still impurity, good. Then this will apply, but it doesn't apply. There are many things that don't apply because we don't have a temple today, certainly on the Torah level. There are certain things that will apply. It's only rabbinic. Right, only on a rabbinic level. I'm not saying just on a rabbinic level, but it's on a rabbinic level, it's just not on a Torah level. Okay, so over here, even though it's a natural thing, right? It's 100% a natural thing. The Torah tells me you still have to separate, right? So, and it makes sense from from our understanding, from our own understanding, right? Again, guys won't think this is such a great thing. Women probably think it's a much better thing, and the reason is they don't, they can relax for 2 weeks. They get a 2-week break from that. But the husband has to deal with her in a way, that even though they can't be intimate, but they still have a connection. Because if the wife senses that you're only going to, be interested when she's permissible, that's it. Question is, how long is a woman going to be able to survive that and just think her husband, that's all he wants, right? That's a recipe for disaster, right? So therefore, it was instituted over here, right? As the Torah tells me, there has to be a separation. Now, we'll call it, you want to call it spiritual cooties. That's what, that's what I would label it as. But logically, right, certainly for a woman, right, logically, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because, a person can't be with his wife whenever he wants. He has to treat her the way she needs to be treated. You have to relate in a different way, right? Not in a physical way. Not an easy thing. Right? I'm not going to say it's an easy thing if a person is really, is really emotional and they like to touch, and, even if they're not intimate, it doesn't matter, right? But, there are barriers, right? The rabbis made barriers. They didn't add to the Torah. They made barriers to show that they didn't want a person, to sin over here. They can't pass things back to each other. They have to have like a symbol on the table. It can be anything. It could be a salt shaker. It could be something that's not normally on the table. At all times. You stick it there to show that, that's the status. You're gonna say, what? I'm gonna forget. You're not necessarily gonna forget, but again, a lot of decrees that the rabbis made. It's not about adding and subtracting. It's about making a fence around the Torah. When they made a fence around the Torah, they wanted to make sure you wouldn't come to a more serious prohibition, right? Mixing milk and meat. We'll give that as an example, right? You're not allowed to, have milk and meat together. The rabbi said you're not allowed to have chicken and milk, right? Chicken and milk together. Why not? Why not chicken? What's the problem with chicken? Well, chicken's really technically meat, right? But what's the Torah prohibition of milk and meat? It's red meat, right? Cow meat, right? Deer meat, whatever, whatever kosher meat is red meat. So what about chicken? So chicken, I would say, is called meat. True, right? So why are you not allowed to eat chicken and milk together? The reason is because chicken, if I eat chicken and milk together, I may forget and I might eat red meat with milk. It's a rabbinic decree. Now, why did they make that rabbinic decree? They made the rabbinic decree for one very simple reason. What they don't want you to come to the Torah prohibition. And the Torah prohibition is eating red meat with milk. Right? You go to McDonald's, it's a rabbinic prohibition for a Jew. Right? You eat a cheeseburger, rabbinic prohibition. Why is it rabbinic? It's rabbinic because the meat's not kosher and the cheese isn't kosher. So it's rabbinic. Here in Israel, you have the only glatt kosher treif McDonald's in the world. Why do I say glatt, kosher, and treif? Because the meat is kosher, the cheese is kosher, and they cook it together. That's a Torah prohibition. That 100% is a Torah prohibition. Any other McDonald's, right? Or let's say, Kentucky Fried Chicken, they have a kosher Kentucky Fried Chicken here. How did they change the recipe? Most people may be not aware. What's the recipe for Kentucky Fried Chicken that's not kosher? They put milk in the batter, right? So milk and chicken, forbidden. Right? Again, the chicken's not kosher, fine. But that would be a rabbinic prohibition. Any milk and meat that's not ritually slaughtered properly is a rabbinic prohibition. Still forbidden, right? But the reason it's going to be forbidden, as we mentioned, that the rabbi said, I don't want you to come to a more severe transgression, right? To a Torah prohibition. They did it by the laws of Shabbos. They did it by kashrus, right? And they did it over here as well. Because someone who comes close to his wife, right, is intimate with his wife when if she hasn't gone to the mikveh, right? So he gets spiritually cut off. And that's pretty bad. I mean, a lot of other terrible things could happen to a person. You can say, oh, what's the big deal? So, she didn't go to, she didn't go to the mikveh. Okay, she didn't go to the mikveh, but she waited. Let's say she waited. You're going to say, okay, because she waited, that takes down the prohibition. It doesn't take down the prohibition, right? She's not seeing blood. Okay, that's better, right? That's certainly better, but he said you have to wait. And then you have to go through this cleansing process. What's the cleansing process? You have to go to the mikveh. If you don't go to the mikveh, there's no difference if she was bleeding or not. Right? That's the way the Torah looks at it. You're going to say, but it's not the same thing. You're right, but that's the way the Torah looks at it. In other words, that woman does not get out of her status of being what we call Anita, someone, a menstrual woman, as we'll define it, right? That doesn't get you out of the problem. What gets you out of the problem is she has 7 clean days, another 7 clean days, or whatever it is, she goes to the mikveh. That gets her out of the problem, right? All things being equal, she goes, fine. If she doesn't go, or she refuses to go, that can be a reason for a husband to divorce his wife. Now, if there are other issues, and there are serious issues, okay, you can't force her to go, right? You can't force her to go. That's going against her will, right? That would be forbidden, right? But if she says, well, despite you, I'm not going to do this, then that's a pretty serious thing. That's definitely a pretty serious thing. But you're not going to force her. Can't force her. Now, her status only changes when she goes to the mikveh. So if a person has relations with his wife, she hasn't gone to the mikveh, Torah prohibition, unless there's repentance, what happens? You get spiritually cut off. Now, what about secular Jews? Right? Secular Jews don't hold by this, right? So we don't hold by this. So, the whole question, children that they have, right? Children that they have could have, they could have serious defects, spiritual defects, because of how this child is conceived, right? Again, if she's bleeding, she's not going to conceive, right? It's unhealthy also. But I'm saying even after, let's say 5 days, 6 days, she stops bleeding, they're intimate, she gets pregnant, right? She doesn't go to the mikveh, right? She gets pregnant. What happens? So there are certain negative character traits that could go into the child, right? That certainly could go into the child. The Talmud says a ben nida, a child that comes from this type of relationship, can have anger issues, can have all kinds of different things. You're going to say, it's not the child's fault. You're right. 100%, it's not the child's fault, right? But when you look at the soul that God puts in the body, and God wires that soul, some people are going to be more prone to anger. Some people are going to be more prone to being stingy. Some people are going to be more prone to, I don't know, yelling and screaming in videos, right? Could be. Some people are more prone to that or to other things. So even if that is the case and we're wired a certain way, God says, I don't want you to act on it. But you're going to say it's part of my psyche, right? It's part of my DNA. Even if it's part of your DNA. We don't just say, well, do whatever you want, right? Act the way you want. You're at a disadvantage. We're all at a disadvantage because the evil inclination goes wild over here. So therefore, if we're all at a disadvantage, what can we claim? We can claim very easily, after 120 years, God's going to judge us and say, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? You're going to say, what do you mean? You wired me this way, right? You made me this way. So of course I made you that way. But I did that because of the source of your soul and what you have to go through. But because you're wired that way doesn't mean you have to act on it. You're just at a disadvantage, right? You're at a disadvantage. Somebody in this situation, 100% is at a disadvantage, no question. And it's a serious disadvantage. It's not, it's not like, they had, it's just anger issue. I'll tell a story. It's famous. I think it's a famous story, but if you haven't heard it, then it's not so famous. There was a story of a woman was supposed to go to the mikveh, and she got there a little bit late. And, a woman there said, sorry, I'm closing up. She's like, no, you don't understand. I have to come. If I don't come, my husband's going to force me. And this woman's like, listen, these are the hours. I'm really sorry. There was no other place to go. Says, I'm really sorry. I can't help you, and she left, she locked the door and she left. And this woman was totally distraught. And okay, she came back, whatever happened, and she conceived. No, she had this child, a lot of issues with this child. He got this child got a bad side of the law many times, different things. And it came out, that he killed a woman. And, the parents are totally distraught, they have to go to court, etc. and they're in court, and it's by the hearing. There's a what do you call it? There's a jury there, etc. And all of a sudden, when the woman hears who the person he killed a woman, right? He killed a woman. When she heard the name of the woman, she fainted. No one understood what's going on, right? They got her like smelling salts. They got her some water, and as the story goes, who was that woman? There wasn't just a random woman that he killed, right? Who was the woman that he killed? The woman that he killed was that woman in the mikveh that wouldn't let his mother go. So again, you're going to say, wow, that's an unbelievable story. I'm not saying it always works out like this and like that, etc. This is a good story, right? This kid turned out to be a wild kid, tremendously wild kid. He ended up killing this woman. Now, this woman, okay, I can understand on her part, right? It's late at night. She wants to go home, etc. Hours are hours. She's not going to sit there and wait another 20 minutes, half an hour, etc. And this is the end result. So you're going to say, is that going to happen in every single case and whatever? Bottom line is, someone who comes from such a union is at more of a disadvantage than others. They're at a disadvantage, right? The only saving grace, for this that can sort of uproot this is the fact that Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, one of the Torah giants of the last generation, Moshe Feinstein has a response and says, even these type of women, right? Secular Jewish women that don't go to the mikveh, right? They don't practice family purity laws. So, all their children could, they could end up doing all kinds of crazy things, right? So what is the limud schus? How can we figure out a way that is really not as bad, right? So say that, at least once in her life, she must have taken a shower, right? A certain amount of water that comes out can have a status in some ways, not exactly like a mikveh, but if you have a certain amount that goes on you, right? Or a person went to the beach, right? Say something like that. That can take away, that spiritual. Now, again, it's a spiritual stigma, right? It can manifest itself in a physical way. This is how it works, right? We don't see it. We don't fathom it. I always say it's kind of like the Matrix, in different ways, as the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, how spiritual forces work and, and all that. We are wired in a certain way. There are times we don't know what, we get upset about certain things. We hear certain things. It affects us in different ways. It could be we've done things to ourselves. It could be we're wired a certain way, right? And certain things that we're wired, we have to work on, they might be much more difficult to overcome. That may all be true, but at the same time, it has a spiritual effect, right? Just like there are physical repercussions, there are spiritual repercussions, right? If a person, has a child with somebody they're not allowed to be with, a forbidden union doesn't necessarily mean someone, both people are married, but it's somebody they're not allowed to be married to. What's the status of the child? The status of the child is what we call a mamzer, right? A mamzer, people will say, is called the bastard child, right? It doesn't necessarily mean a child out of wedlock, but what it does mean is it's a union where it's forbidden. It's a forbidden union. Now, a mamzer, who can a mamzer marry? A mamzer is only allowed to marry someone of that same union or a convert. Now, you're going to say, why is that a problem with a mamzer? That child did nothing to deserve that. God didn't stop this child from being conceived, right? This child comes into the world. So you're going to say it's not the child's fault. You're right. So go back to reincarnation and punishment, reward and punishment. It's not the child's fault because the child's not liable. Why isn't the child liable? Because he's not of age, right? He has to be 12, he has to be 13, right? Or, he has to be 13, she has to be 12, or you're not going to get punished till the age of 20. Whatever the case is, you're not going to punish the child for this. It's not the child's fault, but there are repercussions. There are repercussions. Someone's going to say, hey, what, converts chop liver? Why is the mamzer only allowed to marry a convert, right? Or someone from the same union? Now, this mamzer, right? This child it's a Jew, right? It still has the status of a Jew. The only difference is that now it's blemished. It's blemished because now it's stuck, right? Who it can marry. So you're gonna say, So, so a convert's going to say, come on, what, you telling me I'm blemished? Don't you say that my soul was at Mount Sinai? My soul was there. So what do you mean I'm blemished? So what if they intermarry? Now I have to go through conversion. But see, the difference is the Jewish people are called the chosen people, right? We are the Amam Leches Kohen. We are the priestly kingdom, right? So to speak. So therefore we have yichus. We have a pedigree. Our pedigree goes to Mount Sinai. So a convert will say, my pedigree also goes to Mount Sinai, right? That's true. Because no one who wants to convert is gonna convert unless their soul was there. It doesn't make any sense in general why a non-Jew would want to convert. I don't care intellectually. They came out of the church. They saw the truth and all that. Still doesn't make sense, right? You take someone who's fresh, you take them into a synagogue on Sukkot, and you see these Jews, shaking their lulav like this, and they're shaking it all, with their pomfrons, their lemon on steroids. They're like, wow, what a great religion. This is awesome. And if you ask most Jews, they're shaking their lulav, like, what are you doing? They know this is what God commanded, and this is what it means, whatever, but it doesn't make sense logically, right? So therefore, even if their soul was at Mount Sinai, they're lacking the same soul makeup, right? Therefore, there's a blemish in the pedigree. Now, once they convert and once they go to the mikvah, are they full-fledged Jews? Yes. But, of course, there's always a but. And the but is there are certain limitations, right, of people who they're not allowed to marry. There are certain limitations. So someone's going to say, well, aren't they a full-fledged Jew? Again, there are certain people a Kohen's not allowed to marry, right? If a Jewish woman was promiscuous and the Kohen believes her, he's not allowed to marry her, right? So, a Jew's no better, in that sense. But when it comes to pedigree, and, people may say, oh, this is racist and whatever. God says we are the chosen people. I'm not making this up. Chosen does not mean I have a chip on my shoulder. Chosen means I have more obligations. Anyone who wants to take on my obligations, go through what I go through, more than welcome, right? But we have obligations. We have more obligations, right? Certainly than non-Jews do. So if we act like non-Jews, we don't take on our obligations. We're no different. We're no better. Doesn't matter if I have a pedigree or not. Doesn't matter if I have an extra aspect of my soul. Doesn't matter I shook that lulav. Irrelevant, right? You're no different. The more we want to try and be like the non-Jews, the more they're going to hate us, right? And we don't need any more anti-Semitism. Plenty of it out there, right? Certainly plenty of it out there. But I don't want to digress here. The point is, there are repercussions. There are physical repercussions. There are spiritual repercussions, right? So a person's going to say, come on, someone who came from that union, you want to tell me every single Jew that comes from that type of union, they're going to be wild, they're going to do other things? They have a huge strike against them. If you tell me what Moshe Feinstein said, it goes down. It doesn't disappear, right, necessarily. He may say actually disappears, right? So he's going to be ultra lenient over here. And he'll say, if we go that far, okay, then that doesn't apply. Then you're not living life with your hand tied behind your back. At the same time, if we don't say that, a person's going to have to work extra hard, in this world. You're going to say, well, it's not my fault. You're right. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. What I'm saying is there are repercussions, right? There are physical repercussions, spiritual repercussions. So a person may say, just like we said over here, a person may say, come on, we don't see how that manifests itself because of that act. You're right. I didn't say you did. What I'm saying is, though, there is something else going on. And even if you don't fathom it, you're not going to fathom it at conception, right? You're not going to fathom it when you're born, right? But it can manifest itself. Because the Torah tells me, and this is what, people have an issue with this also, that the Torah says that the child can pay the price for the sins of the father. Right? So people ask the question, what's going on? What do you mean? How can the child pay the price for the parent? Just because the parent does things wrong, what does that have to do with the kid? So the Talmud explains, that if the kid goes in the bad ways of the father or the mother, then that curse is going to apply. But they can break it. In other words, if the parents have certain bad character traits, the kid does not learn from them. They become exemplary people despite who their parents are. That will not apply. But if they go in that direction, then what does the Torah say? They'll pay, right? They'll pay the price because they're doing the exact. It's like they're doing the exact same thing. So you're gonna say, but I didn't choose who my parents are, right? We don't have a choice who our parents are. We don't have a choice who our siblings are. We don't have a choice of socioeconomic, right? We don't have a choice of almost in anything. We do have free will. Free will is severely limited. It's not the topic for now. Free will is definitely limited, right? But a person has to understand we're wired in a certain way. And if we're wired in a certain way, it could be for any number of reasons. One main reason could be because God says, okay, I want you to overcome these things. I'm going to put these things, I'm going to make them part of you, right? You're not necessarily going to fathom them, but they're going to manifest themselves in different ways. So everybody has them. We know what our strengths are. We know what our weaknesses are. And someone's going to say, well, how do I know what my potential is? So it's a great rabbi once explained to me. It's not the answer, but it could be. And he said that, think about something you would rather not do. You'd rather slit your eyeballs with glass than do this, right? Think about what a person would never, ever want to do in their life, ever, right? That's probably what you're here to fix up. Is that a guarantee? No, right? It's definitely not a guarantee, right? But it's something, we're giving all kinds of traits, some good, some bad, etc. But every single person in this world, the Ramchal says that every single person has a mission, right? And their mission is not going to be the same as anyone else's, right? But we're not all wired the same, right? So we can come from all, have different experiences, different life experiences, different family experiences, all kinds of different things we go through that make us who we are. But there's an underlying thing that people never see. What's the underlying thing? The underlying thing is these spiritual things that are inside of us, right? If a person came from that union or any, other things also, whatever they may be, they may affect the person in a way that they don't see. And that, they may, that they certainly wouldn't see when they're younger, per se. It could manifest itself. It could manifest itself when they're younger, could manifest itself when they're older, right? It depends, when it's gonna, when it's gonna come out. But the bottom line is, what we see in the world, what we see in our own lives. When it comes to spiritual things, we don't see anything, right? There are many things we don't understand, right? Righteous people seem to have it hard. Evil people seem to have it easy. All these different things, we see what goes on. That doesn't make sense, doesn't make any rational sense, right? But there are spiritual things going on that can have an effect on the person where the person doesn't even know where it came from. There are certain things, maybe someone, early in life, maybe that's some traumatic experience, or something that, gets triggered later, gets buried or gets triggered or whatever. Or it doesn't have to be necessarily traumatic. It can be something that was already there, something that God placed there, something that's dormant. And then God's going to say, okay, I want it to come out. I want it to manifest itself. And I want to see, okay, what you're going to do, how are you going to act, etc. It could be something obvious, it could be something, it could be something less than obvious, but it could, it could come out at a time where a person doesn't think that, they're going through something, like, let's say I'm going to end here, they're going through something, let's say very hard, very, very difficult. How am I going to get through this, etc. And God implanted inside of them something that he wanted a dormant character trait to come out. And how's that dormant character trait going to come out? It's going to come out when that person goes through something, whatever it is, right? Whatever this traumatic thing is. The person, how I can't deal with it. How can I deal with it? This, that. And then they actually become a spokesman, and they're actually able to help other people because they went through this traumatic thing, right? So God puts that dormant character trait in there. We don't feel it. We don't fathom it, right? We can't imagine it. person goes through something, whatever it is, and all of a sudden he's got all this strength. He's got all this emunah. He's got all this belief, right? This is after years and years, right? It could be after years of learning and, all kinds of things, worked on themselves, whatever. And all of a sudden something hits them upside the head, totally not expected. And, most people would be crushed, by it. So what happens? So God he already made the refuah before the makkah. The makkah means he got whacked. Something happened. Something serious happened, right? What's the refuah? What's the antidote? What he put inside of you to overcome it. Now, a person may need therapy. You may need help, etc. But it's there, right? It's there. We don't fathom it. So, just like the Matrix, there's so many things we see, that we don't understand, and we can't fathom. It doesn't mean over here, just like we mentioned, we're talking about the 7-day period. We're talking about, something spiritual, right? Et cetera. We try to explain what that means. So something like that, okay, I have to understand. I have to make it part of my life. I'm getting a glimpse of what that spirituality is, but we have all kinds of things spiritually inside of us that can certainly manifest itself, positive, negative, whatever it is that we don't fathom at all. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So even though I would call, something like this spiritual cooties, that we don't really fathom 100% what it is. It does make sense. I mean, I hope I made sense out of it, logically, what it represents, but this idea of purity and impurity, we're very far away. There are only certain things we do in this world that give us even a glimpse, of what that is. Many things don't apply. Many, many things. So when it comes to sacrifices, it comes to, these type of things, we don't relate to it, right? We don't relate to it in a certain way. But someone who practices these laws, it definitely is a way to relate. You may not like it, but it is a way, it certainly is a way to relate, and understand spiritually, there's a higher purpose. One other thing, the Christians, the way they look at this, which I didn't even get into, they look at it as just like a nasty thing. It's like, oh, it's dirty, it's impure, it's this. The way we look at it is that it's something, it's a tremendous urge that God gave us, but it can be harnessed in the right way. And when it's harnessed in the right way, then you bring God into the picture. If it's abused and it's not used in the right way, okay, that's something else. But we're in this world, Jews are here in this world to sanctify the physical. Sanctifying the physical is a lot more difficult, right? That's why we say Yom Kippur, Purim, Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. What do you mean? Two opposites. Purim is a day people get, plastered, they dress up, they eat a lot. What do they do on Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, you're fasting, you feel like a piece of dirt, you beat your heart for all the terrible things you've done, 5 times during the day, and all that. So what's the difference? The difference is that Purim can have the status of Yom Kippur, right? When if a person drinks and what's coming out of their mouth is words of Torah, they want to be closer to God. That's their goal, not stupid stuff or whatever. Once they're doing that in the right way, right? What does that do? It draws you closer to God. Anyone can be righteous if you're fasting. I mean, you could complain, you're hungry, you think about what you're going to eat afterwards, but it's an intense day, right? Purim's also an intense day. But if I sanctify the physical, it can have the status of Yom Kippur. The Christians don't have that, right? It's evil, it's bad, it's, whatever. We harness it the right way, that brings God into the picture. We don't, it's over, right? So that was my conclusion in about 25 seconds, because I know you're not going to give me any more.
You're already 5 minutes over, man.
I know it's 5 minutes over. I was going to try and go 7 minutes over, but you shut me down.
Oh, shut you down, man. Shut you down like some poisoned food. No, I'm just kidding, man. That was awesome. Cool. Yeah, I'm sure what you've, all the things we've discussed, there's going to be some good questions and comments. So if we need to follow up with this next week, we certainly can. But anyway,
all
yeah.
The hate mail should go to TanakTalk.com. Don't send
Hey,
it to me.
hey. Now wait a minute. So no,
1-800 I hate William. That's where you send it.
It's called Talk to the Hand because the face ain't listening. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a great week, Rabbi, you as well, and I look forward to seeing you guys same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. And I think we got one more show lined up for this evening with Rabbi Federow. So you guys stay tuned, and we will see you soon. Shalom, everybody. Shalom, Rabbi.